She was just a humble young nurse, gently bathing and caring for a comatose millionaire day after day, never expecting anything in return. But one morning he suddenly opened his eyes, and what happened next will leave you speechless. Elena Duran was just 27, a nurse in training at Highgrove Medical Center, tucked into a quiet district of southern Glencourt. While others scrambled to work in flashy urban hospitals, Elena chose peace and purpose. Her patients were her priority, not prestige. She'd heard whispers about the mysterious man in room 419. Rumors said he was once a tech magnate, wealthy, powerful, and devastatingly handsome, before an accident left him comatose. The hospital called him a long-term liability. Elena saw a soul suspended between two worlds. The man's name was Damien Voss, and he'd been unconscious for 6 months. No family visits, no one to care. Just silent beeps from machines and cold, sterile air. When Elena was assigned to his care, she felt something unexplainable, like fate had placed her there. Every day she bathed Damien with careful hands and whispered into the stillness. Stories of her childhood, her dreams of becoming a nurse, her love for forgotten souls. She didn't know if he heard, but she believed. Somewhere, somehow, someone was listening. Elena's routine with Damien became sacred. Mornings began with warm sponge baths, gentle massages to stimulate muscles, and soft classical music humming through a speaker. Nurses teased her, called it her phantom romance. But she didn't mind. She saw it as hope. She started bringing little gifts, flowers from the hospital garden, poems scribbled on napkins, her favorite old book, Wuthering Heights. She read aloud daily, her voice low and melodic. She'd pause often and ask, "What do you think, Damien?" before smiling at his silence. Then came the subtle shifts, barely noticeable to others, a flicker in his eyelids. The slightest twitch of his fingers, the faintest rise in heart rate when she read a funny passage. Elena logged every change religiously. Doctors brushed it off. Involuntary responses, they said. But her heart knew otherwise. And so the nurse and the silent man continued their daily rendezvous. What had begun as duty was now devotion. Elena never missed a shift. She began dreaming of Damien, fully awake, smiling, laughing, thanking her, but reality kept him locked in stillness. And yet her faith never wavered. It was just another Tuesday. Rain tapped against the windows as Elena entered room 419, humming an old folk tune. She read Damien a passage about forgiveness. Her hand gently wiped his forehead. Then his fingers moved. Not a twitch, a definite, deliberate movement. She froze. "Damien?" she whispered, breath caught in her chest. His eyelids fluttered. Machines beeped faster. Elena ran her fingers over his hand again, and this time he squeezed back. Tears welled in her eyes. "Damien, can you hear me?" His mouth quivered. "Nurse!" she shouted through the intercom. "He's awake!" Doctors rushed in. Chaos erupted. Monitors buzzed. Vitals spiked. But amidst the noise, Damien's eyes opened. Glassy, unfocused, yet undeniably alive. He looked straight at Elena and whispered one word. "Why?" She clasped his hand, sobbing. "You're back," she whispered. "You came back." And so began the miracle that no one could explain, but Elena always believed in. Damien Voss stared at the ceiling with a haze clouding his mind. The lights above seemed too bright, voices too loud. But through the noise he saw her, Elena, the nurse with soft eyes and a warm touch, the voice he remembered from the dark. "Elena," he rasped, her name foreign yet familiar on his tongue. She leaned close, barely able to speak through her tears. "You remember me?" He nodded faintly, and something flickered behind his gaze. Fear. "They said you crashed your car," she told him, brushing a lock of damp hair from his brow. "But you're safe now. You made it." Damien struggled to sit. Pain laced through his body, but it was the pain behind his eyes that haunted her. "There was someone else," he whispered, gripping her wrist. "Someone was in the car, or watching. I don't know. I remember shadows, screaming." The doctors insisted he rest, but his agitation only grew. He began repeating a word. Sabotage. Elena stayed after her shift that night, sitting in the corner staring at his chart, wondering what really happened the night Damien nearly died, and why he seemed so certain it hadn't been an accident. The following days were a blur of tests and therapy. Damien was regaining strength, but his mind remained fractured. He spoke in fragments about a cabin, faulty brakes, and a voice he couldn't place. Elena brought him a journal. "Write anything you remember," she suggested. Each page held slivers of truth. "I remember arguing, about money, about control, my company, Someone wanted it. His hand trembled with each word. Elena gently prodded. Who would want to hurt you? He hesitated. My brother. Her breath caught. You have a brother? Cade, he said slowly. He's always wanted what I had, always felt like he was in my shadow. Elena couldn't ignore it. Damien wasn't paranoid, he was wounded and possibly betrayed. That night after he'd fallen asleep, Elena sat in the hospital garden, her mind racing. She believed Damien, but what could she do with these fragmented memories? She was just a nurse. No one would listen. Unless she found the truth herself. A week later, Damien mentioned the cabin again, this time with coordinates. Elena took notes. Against her better judgment, she borrowed her uncle's car and drove into the wooded hills of Norval, where Damien claimed to have spent a weekend before the crash. What she found chilled her. The cabin was abandoned but intact. Inside there were 2 wine glasses, an untouched dinner table, and a security camera half hidden in a corner. Dust covered everything, except for recent tire tracks leading away from the gravel road. She took photos. As she turned to leave, something else caught her eye. A piece of torn cloth wedged in the doorframe. Luxury fabric, deep grey with a monogram stitched faintly into the corner. CV Cade Voss. Back at the hospital, Damien's recovery was accelerating. With every memory that returned, his anger deepened. Elena shared what she found, and when she mentioned the monogram, his expression hardened. He was there, Damien growled. I wasn't paranoid. Cade set me up. That very afternoon, Cade Voss arrived at Highgrove. Charismatic and impeccably dressed, Cade swept into Damien's room with flowers and a camera crew in tow. My brave brother, he smiled for the media. The prodigal genius returns. Damien played along, barely masking his fury. Elena stood quietly beside him, analysing every word, every glance Cade shot her way. That night, Damien confessed, if Cade suspects what I remember, he'll try to finish what he started. Elena clutched his hand, then we stay ahead of him. Elena began researching Cade, his business dealings, public appearances and legal records. She discovered multiple instances where Cade had lobbied board members to remove Damien before the accident. Meanwhile, Damien's company, Voxsphere, had shifted drastically since the crash. Cade had seized interim control, selling assets Damien would never have approved. One evening, Damien broke down in tears. I built that company from scratch. Cade would have let me die for a profit. Elena sat beside him, her voice steady. Then we take it back, but first, we prove what he did. They needed hard evidence, and someone who could testify. Elena reached out to an old contact of Damien's, Silas Grimm, a former Voxsphere engineer who'd mysteriously vanished a month before the crash. She found him living off-grid, frightened and disillusioned. After much convincing, Silas finally spoke. I installed the GPS tracker Cade asked for. I thought it was a security upgrade, but then I found emails, threats, plans. I left before I became another accident. He handed over a flash drive. Everything's on here. The tampering, the bribed board members. Cade knew Damien would take that road. He made sure the brakes failed. It was everything they needed, but it came with risk. Elena and Damien were now holding the truth. And Cade Voss was not the kind of man who let loose ends walk away unharmed. The flash drive burned like fire in Elena's pocket. She didn't sleep that night. Neither did Damien. The truth was now tangible, damning, and dangerous. The next morning, a black SUV was parked across from the hospital. No plates. Same one from yesterday. It never moved. That same day, Elena received a voicemail from an unknown number. A distorted voice warned, "Drop the investigation, nurse. You're playing with fire." She trembled as she replayed the message. Damien's face tightened when she told him. "He's watching," he muttered. "I underestimated how far Cade would go." Elena filed a police report, but without concrete action, the officers shrugged. Could be a prank, they said. No law's been broken. She and Damien knew better. They encrypted the drive and backed up its contents in 3 places, cloud, USB, and a hidden safety deposit box. They couldn't afford to lose the only proof that could destroy Cade Voss. Still, as the sun set and shadows crept into room 419, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was getting ready to strike. Elena returned to her tiny apartment one night to find her front door ajar. She froze. Nothing appeared stolen, but drawers were disturbed. Her laptop was gone. A photo of her mother, ripped in half. On the bathroom mirror, a message scrawled in lipstick, "Stop digging." Her chest tightened. She called Damien immediately. "This is escalating," he said, voice steady but low with dread. "You can't go back there. From now on, you stay at the hospital, or with me." Elena hesitated. She wasn't used to depending on anyone, but her instincts told her she was in real danger. She moved into the hospital's guest quarters. Damien pulled strings to ensure her safety, requesting a nurse transfer for her on paper so she'd remain by his side. In the days that followed, Cade made another appearance, this time casually mentioning Elena in front of Damien. "She's a charming nurse," Cade smiled. "Reminds me of Mom." Damien's jaw clenched. "You never cared about Mom." Cade's smile didn't falter. "And yet, here I am, caring." He turned to Elena and added quietly, "Take care of my brother. Some people don't know how precious life is until it slips away." It wasn't advice, it was a warning. The fear didn't drive them apart, it pulled them closer. Damien began to open up more, not just about the betrayal, but about his past. Late-night conversations turned into shared laughter, vulnerable silences, and quiet moments filled with meaning. One evening, after a physiotherapy session, Elena massaged his recovering hand. He looked at her, not as his nurse, not even as his savior, but as a woman. "You know," he said softly, "I don't remember the crash or the hospital or even my own birthday, but I remember your voice, reading, singing, praying." Elena blinked, emotions rising. "I never stopped talking. I hoped you were listening." "I was," he whispered. "You brought me back." Their hands lingered, their eyes locked. In that moment, everything unsaid hung in the air between them like trembling light. He kissed her hand, gently, tentatively. It wasn't the moment they fell in love. It was the moment they both realized they already had. Determined to gather final proof, Damien remembered the cabin's security system, one Cade had forgotten. Elena retrieved the hidden memory card from the camera. It took days to decode, but what they uncovered was chilling. Video footage showed Cade entering the cabin the day before Damien's accident. He wasn't alone. He met with a mechanic, one later identified as under investigation for insurance fraud. They watched as the mechanic handed Cade a set of modified brake pads. "I don't want him dead," Cade said. "Just out of the picture long enough to secure the merger." But what happened next contradicted those words. Cade returned the next morning alone and left with the brake pads wrapped in a towel. "He changed his mind," Damien muttered. "He wanted me dead after all." Elena looked pale. "This is it, Damien. This is the proof." Now they had it all, motive, evidence, and the man who could testify. They contacted an investigative journalist and prepared to go public, but Cade was already one step ahead. The morning of their scheduled interview, Elena was detained at the hospital. Security claimed they found a vial of fentanyl in her locker. Her license was suspended. She was escorted off the premises like a criminal. Elena couldn't speak, rage and disbelief choking her. "I would never," she cried to the hospital board. Cade's voice rang out behind her. "Intentional or not, it's a serious breach. I warned Damien about her getting too close." She was silenced, humiliated, and worst of all, separated from Damien when he needed her most. But Elena didn't crumble. She contacted the journalist privately, handing over the drive and Silas's testimony. "If they bury me, fine," she said. "Just don't let them bury the truth." That night, the story broke. The expose aired nationwide. Headlines screamed, "Tech giant's brother behind near-fatal crash." Damien's footage, Silas's testimony, and Cade's shady financial moves were front-page news. Voxsphere's board called an emergency session. Cade went silent, but the hospital remained skeptical of Elena. Though public support poured in, she was still suspended, pending an internal investigation. She couldn't return to her patients or to Damien. Then, just as things seemed lost, Damien held a live press conference. Still recovering, seated in a wheelchair, he addressed the world. "Elena Duran saved my life twice. First with her hands, then with her courage. She is not only innocent, she is the reason I'm standing here today." The crowd erupted. Journalists fired questions. But Damien ended the conference with one final line. "Justice isn't about revenge. It's about truth. And the truth is, my brother tried to kill me." With overwhelming public pressure, authorities issued a warrant. Cade Voss was arrested trying to flee the country. The footage from the cabin, the testimony from Silas, and the tampered brake system confirmed his intent. His charges: attempted murder, corporate fraud, and obstruction of justice. For days, media followed the trial closely. Cade tried to shift blame, but the evidence was airtight. In the end, he was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Damien reclaimed control of Voxsphere and immediately began rebuilding the company's ethical foundation. But there was one more thing he needed to rebuild: his life. Elena's license was reinstated, her name cleared. The hospital apologized publicly and offered her a prestigious promotion. She turned it down. Instead, she walked quietly back into room 419, now Damien's personal suite. He looked up from his chair, a soft smile on his face. "Welcome home, Nurse Duran," she laughed. "I'll always be your nurse, Damien, but maybe something more." He rose slowly and took her hands. "Elena, you brought me back when I had nothing. I don't want a life without you in it." From a drawer, he pulled out a ring. "Elena Duran, will you marry me?" They didn't want a lavish ceremony. Damien and Elena married in the Norval woods, near the very cabin where truth began to unravel. This time, the cabin was restored, warm, filled with friends, music, and hope. Damien wore a simple grey suit. Elena walked barefoot down a path of wildflowers in a white lace dress. Her smile shone brighter than the sun filtering through the pines. Vows were exchanged under a canopy of trees. As Damien slid the ring on her finger, he whispered, "You believed in me when no one else did." And she answered, "You made me feel seen when I thought I was invisible." They moved into a quiet countryside home, where Damien continued physical therapy and Elena began writing a book, The Nurse Who Listened. They started a foundation supporting whistleblowers and caregivers, giving voices to the silenced. Elena returned to nursing part-time but remained focused on Damien's recovery. Each day was filled with laughter, resilience, and deep love. They built a life on trust, not the kind formed overnight, but the kind forged through fire. 1 year later, Elena sat on the edge of their porch, holding Damien's hand, watching the stars. "You ever wonder why all this happened?" she asked. Damien nodded. "To break us down, so we could build something better." She looked at him. "Do you regret anything?" He leaned in, brushed her cheek. "Only that I didn't wake up sooner." They laughed. The miracle wasn't just that Damien survived. It was that love, real, enduring love, was born in silence, grew in truth, and bloomed in second chances. This story reminds us that faith, kindness, and courage can shine through even the darkest moments. Sometimes, the most miraculous connections happen when we least expect them, and no matter how broken life may seem, healing and love are always possible. Like stories that touch your heart and stir your soul? Subscribe for more emotional, dramatic, and inspiring stories like this one. And remember, every whisper matters. Every life counts.